The mother-in-law, Dill, Avery, declared their intention to take the upstairs and announce that her mother needed the guest room, her voice flat while she twisted a silver key the narrator had not given her. The narrator had just placed down the coffee things, 2 cups, cinnamon biscuits, and cream in a small pitcher. This felt like the kind of family visit one anticipates. Mason, the narrator's son, smiled at the narrator as if they were casually discussing dinner, not allocating rooms in her newly purchased house. The narrator didn't immediately respond, instead turning off the softly whistling kettle to gather her thoughts. Her heart wasn't pounding, it was sinking. Tin. Avery moved through the house as if she were the owner. She commented on the good natural light and the spacious closets upstairs. It's ideal. Her knees aren't great, so she'll require the larger guest room. Mason and I don't mind the smaller one for now, she said. The narrator noted that the phrase for now suggested a prolonged stay. She glanced at Mason, her son, whom she had raised alone following the accident, but he avoided eye contact. He was rubbing the back of his neck and staring at the coasters, appearing eager for the conversation to conclude. Finally, the narrator asked in a calm voice, "You've already given her a key?" "Oh, she got one when we house sat last fall," Avery quickly replied. "I made a spare copy just in case," Avery added. The narrator repeated, "just in case," to herself. She didn't voice a refusal or an acceptance. Instead, she poured and served the coffee. They continued talking as if everything was fine, expressing their gratitude. They spoke of the difficulty of finding a suitable home for 3 adults and 2 children. They claimed that having this house made everything simpler. The narrator gave a quiet smile, then excused herself to tend to the porch plants, realizing that the key, the discussion of rooms, and Avery's language showed a decision had already been made. It hit her that this was not a short visit, but a planned move-in, and she had been excluded from the arrangement. The narrator had signed the closing documents in private. There was no celebration or group message, just her, the real estate agent, and a steady hand on the pen. It wasn't the biggest home she could have purchased, but it was the right one. It was a single-story, cedar-sided cottage nestled behind a row of maples, just 30 steps from the lake. It featured hardwood floors, large windows, and a porch that perfectly captured the sunrise, just as she'd envisioned during all those overtime holiday shifts. She had meticulously reviewed the finances and budgeted every penny. Sassy. After 50 years of working, after losing her husband and raising her son primarily through sheer determination, this house was her well-deserved reward, one she hadn't requested from anyone. She bought it without a cosigner, without a mortgage, and without any family financial help. Her name was the sole one on the deed. For the initial 3 weeks, it felt like the start of a peaceful, cherished new phase. Then Avery began to introduce her ideas. Wouldn't it be nice to give the guest bathroom a coastal paint job? She asked while video recording with her phone. "Oh, and we could add built-in shelves in the den for the kids' books," she continued. The narrator felt Avery wasn't truly asking. She used the word "we" as if it were a mutual understanding, as if the narrator's signature had somehow authorized their name too. Avery then inquired about an extra mailbox key and if the narrator would consider installing a gate on the back path for the children's safety. Initially, these were small suggestions accompanied by smiles. However, they were increasingly underpinned by certainty and assumptions, implying the house was merely on loan until their needs expanded enough to take it over. The narrator stopped replying, choosing only to nod, listen, and pour more coffee. Despite this, they kept using future tense language, constructing a life where the narrator was a stationary, pliable, and easily relocated fixture. That evening, she reread the deed, holding it and tracing the raised seal with her finger. The house belonged to her, but the atmosphere had changed, and so had the mail. It was a small, plain white envelope addressed to Ted Carlson, care of her address. She stood at the mailbox, staring, hoping it would explain itself. The handwriting was unfamiliar but neat, and the return address was from Florida. It took a moment for her to recall the name. Avery's mother. She brought the letter inside and placed it by the coffee maker. She didn't open it but stood still, waiting for her heartbeat to calm down. The aroma of dark roast coffee filled the kitchen, but she felt numb. Later that morning, she drove to the post office. The clerk was exceedingly polite. Yes, she confirmed, consulting her computer. The forwarding request was submitted 3 days ago. Use Carlson's mail is now being redirected here. Is there an issue, ma'am? The narrator didn't answer right away, just requested a copy of the form. The signature was not her own. She drove home in silence, the low hum of the heater, the only sound, no radio, no specific thoughts, just the slow dawning realization that a decision about her life had been made without her input, yet again. Once more, she didn't call Mason or confront anyone. Instead, she called a locksmith. Then she contacted a lawyer she had worked with when she handled surgical scheduling and estate transfers at the clinic. The lawyer answered on the second ring and immediately sensed the issue, asking, "Are you okay?" "I just want to ensure things remain as I left them," the narrator stated. When Mason was 12, he brought home a permission slip for a school trip to Washington, D.C. He left it on the counter casually, as if the cost wasn't equivalent to 2 shifts at the urgent care clinic and fewer groceries that week. He desperately wanted to go, mentioning he'd never seen snow fall on marble stairs and that all the other parents were already reserving flights. That night, after he was asleep, she sat on the floor, patching the split seam of his jacket with mismatched gray thread that held firm. She stayed up late, devising a way to pay for it, working extra Sundays, declining social coffees, and even pawning a bracelet her mother had left her. A sacrifice Mason never knew about. That was just one single trip. When his father died, she sold his cherished coin collection, rare quarters and commemorative sets he had planned to pass down. She hated letting them go, but tuition was due, and she prioritized memories over possessions. For the next 2 decades, every decision she made had Mason's well-being woven into the plan. When he graduated, she had hoped for a simple thank you or an offer to help with the financial burden. Instead, he brought Avery into her life. And now here they were, with Avery speaking on his behalf more often than he did. When Avery proposed things like new curtains, different paint, or a second vehicle, Mason would agree readily, as if these decisions came at no cost. During their last visit, she offered him coffee, but he mentioned he had switched to green smoothies. Avery joked, "We're trying to keep him alive longer than his father, right?" He didn't even look at the narrator. Holding the mug she had saved from his college bookstore, she realized how distant he had become, not just from her, but from understanding the true weight of her sacrifices. The mail was not the first warning sign, but it was the one she finally decided to address. Avery had described the upcoming gathering as just a casual dinner, nothing fancy, simply family time. The narrator brought a homemade pie, still warm, as was her custom. Mason greeted her, kissed her cheek, and accepted the dish as if it were an offering. Their kitchen was scented with lemon and garlic. The children ran around barefoot, soft music played, and Avery wore the special smile she reserved for guests and social media. They sat at the table, Avery at the head, Mason beside her, and the narrator near the window. Avery poured wine before the narrator could even request water, and she noticed there were only 3 complete place settings. Once the children were settled with pasta in the other room, Avery stood and tapped her glass. "I just want to express how fortunate we are," she began, raising her voice to ensure the narrator heard every word. "Not everyone gets the opportunity to live in a multi-generational home. It truly is a gift, especially for our children to grow up with the wisdom of their elders under the same roof." Mason nodded, chewing his food as if the speech were prearranged. "And with your health still good," he added, "we know you'll flourish with company. Older people need companionship." The narrator looked at the wine glass. She never received the water she wanted. "We've already begun making some room," Avery continued. "Mom is excited to be close to the lake. She will be moving her belongings and gradually. No rush, just settling," she said, using the word settling as if referring to something natural like fog or dust or her permanent resident. The narrator didn't interrupt or ask questions, simply listening and registering every word, assumption, and timeline they presented, as though she had already agreed to their plan. When the dinner concluded, she helped clear the dishes. Avery returned the empty pie plate to the inn. Everyone loved it, Avery said sweetly. The narrator smiled and carried the empty dish to her car like a precious artifact. She realized they thought she was pliable, easily managed, and accommodating, but she had a schedule, a lawyer, and no intention of becoming anyone's silent acceptance. The next development came on a Thursday afternoon, right after she had finished watering the porch ferns. Her phone vibrated with an unfamiliar group text message. The preview, Avery C. Her house will need a refresh once we're fully in, caught her attention. She opened it, assuming it was a mistake, but realized it was simply the kind of mistake Avery wouldn't want to admit. The thread included 4 other names. She recognized Avery's sister and a cousin she remembered from a Thanksgiving conversation. She scrolled through the messages and paused at the next one. Kristen L. Does she even know yet? Avery C. replied, not officially, but she'll adjust. Then Marina P. She doesn't strike me as the type to put up a fight. The rest of the thread discussed paint choices, furniture arrangement, and how they would finally have breathing room. One message jested about turning the narrator's reading nook into a yoga corner. Another asked if the garage could be used for storage. She reread the thread slowly, not because she failed to understand, but to fully absorb the weight of every word. They weren't simply trying to share her space. They were openly planning their takeover among themselves, though they thought they were hiding it from her. This time, they hadn't. At first, she didn't reply. She simply took a screenshot of the messages. She took another and then forwarded the entire thread to her own email, labeling it contingency. They didn't seem to notice. No one sent a follow-up claiming a mistake, no frantic retractions, and no apologies. They genuinely believed what they had written. They believed she was too submissive to stop them. Later that evening, Mason texted asking if they could come by that weekend to just drop off a few boxes. Her reply was a single word, no. He didn't text back, but she could almost perceive the silence on the other end of the line. They had disregarded her, and now she was counting down the days. He arrived at the driveway at 6:42 a.m., exactly on schedule. She had chosen the earliest possible appointment to minimize the chance of being seen or having second thoughts. He got out with a small toolbox and a clipboard, and she met him at the door with a cup of black coffee and quiet determination. A full lock chain, she instructed. Every entrance, including the garage. He nodded and got to work without asking questions. As he worked around the house, she retrieved the small metal box near the door where spare keys had been kept and took out the last copy Avery had made, which was marked with red tape. Avery had claimed it was just in case someone forgot theirs. The narrator dropped it in the trash. She logged into the garage panel to reset the access code and printed an updated guest list for the security system, with only her name remaining. By the time the locksmith was finished, the sun had fully risen, spilling light across the porch as if nothing significant had occurred. Yet everything had changed. He handed her 4 new keys. She took them all and put them in a drawer, with one key hidden behind old tax documents and the deed. It was a place no one but her would look. There was no anger, no shouting, just a clarity they had never expected her to possess. She went back inside, brewed fresh coffee, and sat in her preferred spot by the lake view window. The lake surface was calm and the reflection clear. She had envisioned this view for years and worked too hard to let others decide who got to enjoy it. By 9 o'clock, she had deleted the old group thread and created a new file on her computer titled Contingency Actions, Executed. Then she put the deed back into its folder, locked the metal box, and waited for the sound of tires on the gravel driveway. She saw them approach before they reached the steps. 3 people, 2 rolling suitcases, a garment bag, and the self-assured stride Avery always displayed when she believed she could dictate reality. Mason walked behind them, eyes downcast, carrying a duffel bag. Avery didn't bother to knock. She walked directly to the door and tried her key, turning it once, then again, to no effect. She pulled it out, frowned, and attempted the doorknob, which didn't turn. She glanced at Mason, then tried the key once more, this time with more force, as if hoping the door would suddenly yield. Yeats, Avery's mother, stood slightly behind them, wearing a sun hat and holding a foil-covered casserole dish. The narrator opened the door just a crack before they could knock, no wider than necessary. Avery stepped forward, intending to enter, but the narrator blocked her path. In both hands, the narrator held a neatly taped cardboard box labeled with Avery's name. Inside were 3 pieces of redirected mail, 2 housewarming flyers Avery had left on the counter, and the change of address form from the post office. Avery remained silent for the moment. The narrator gently presented the box to her, then let go. Avery reached out a little late and almost dropped the corner of the box. Mason tried to speak, but no sound came out. The narrator offered no explanation or defense. She simply and slowly closed the door. There was no slam or audible lock click. Just a measured finality to the conversation they believed they could manipulate. Inside, the house seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. The silence enveloped the narrator like armor. Through the window, she watched them stand there for a moment, suitcases at their feet, shocked by a door that was now closed to them. Mason quietly said something to Avery that the narrator couldn't hear. Avery shook her head. It bent to pick up one of the bags, the casserole still clutched in her other hand. By the time the narrator put the kettle on, the porch was empty and the box was gone. However, they had left behind the quiet implication of a key that no longer functioned. The next morning, Avery sent a text message. "We'll be telling people what truly occurred, how you shut out your own family, how you humiliated us, just so you are aware." The message had no greeting or punctuation, just a threat thinly disguised as self-justification. The narrator did not reply. By noon, Mason called. She let the call go to voicemail. He left a lengthy message, his voice strained and weary. He asked to talk, saying the situation had escalated unnecessarily, and that Avery was only trying to make things work. He never apologized. That night, Theda, the next-door neighbor, knocked with a bag of groceries and a knowing half-smile. "I warned you she was trouble," Theda said, placing the bag on the counter. "That woman came by asking if I'd seen elder neglect." The narrator laughed so hard she almost dropped her hedge trimmers. She offered Theda coffee, who accepted it black, as always. It turned out the story was already circulating, but not initiated by Avery. The narrator's realtor, Brina, who handled the house closing the previous spring, had seen one of Avery's public social media posts. It was vague but pointed, mentioning elder isolation and inherited property. She didn't use names, nor did she need to. Her post described how a woman buys a retirement cottage alone. Months later, her son's wife duplicates keys, starts forwarding her mother's mail there, and plots an uninvited move-in. The owner discovers this and replaces the locks, leading to silence. The post resonated, and within hours it was republished by a community legal blog. The comments section exploded with people sharing similar stories, and a few even guessed the narrator's identity. She didn't confirm anything. The most surprising reaction was the consensus of "I believe her" that appeared frequently in the threads. Strangers understood that tranquility should not have to be fought for repeatedly, and that silence is not weakness, but the wisdom to choose the right moment to speak. By the close of the week, Avery stopped posting. Mason sent one final text. "I don't understand how we ended up here. The narrator knew precisely how, and she wasn't turning back. 3 weeks have passed." She wakes at 6 without an alarm, greeted by the quiet of the morning filtering through the trees. The air is cool yet gentle, and she moves through the kitchen with a newfound sense of tranquility. The coffee brews slowly and steadily, a process she no longer rushes. She uses one mug, her favorite, which is chipped and has a smooth, worn handle. She takes it to the screen porch where the first light always reaches. There is only one chair out there now. She donated the other last Sunday. The guest room is vacant. She has stripped it bare, getting rid of the bed frame, mattress, and extra dresser. The closet now holds only art supplies and brushes she hasn't used in years. She sees colors she used to long for when she was too exhausted to dream. The easel is back up, leaning by the den window where the sun shines on the wall for 2 hours every afternoon. She has started with small canvases, focusing only on color, not yet specific subjects, allowing her hands to recall the feeling of freedom, Her will has been revised, removing the names of those who no longer contacted her and those who presumed their entitlement. She added a foundation that supports elderly women in legal conflicts with their families. Her lawyer smiled when she explained, calling the action practical. Mason hasn't returned. She suspects he may have finally learned his lesson, or perhaps not, and that uncertainty is its own form of peace. She saw Avery's mother at the grocery store once, and the woman looked away before the narrator had to. That was perfectly fine. The lake outside is like glass, utterly still. She sits with her coffee, free of expectations or demands. The only sounds are the breeze against the screen and the comforting weight of a space that is finally and completely hers. There are no extra keys, no alternative plans, and no unspoken assumptions echoing in the hallway. There is just a a porch, a lake, and a life she took back, one locked door at a time.